They will lose again. I want you to think about that for a moment, not as a political slogan, not as propaganda, as a cold, hard, strategic reality that the most senior analysts in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing are now privately admitting to each other. The United States and the Zionist regime went to war against Iran. They lost. And if they try again, they will lose again. I am going to explain to you exactly why. And I am going to explain it in a way that the mainstream Western media will never tell you, because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth disrupts the narrative. And the truth is that something has fundamentally and permanently changed in this region and in this world. Let me begin with where we are right now, the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow body of water, roughly 33 kilometers at its most narrow point, is the single most important choke point for global energy. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass through it every single day. One-fifth of the world's total oil supply, liquefied natural gas from Qatar, petrochemicals, fertilizers, refined products, all of it flowing through that narrow channel. And right now, Iran controls that channel. Not partially, not theoretically, completely. And the consequences of this are not something we are going to feel in 6 months. We are already feeling them. And what most people do not yet understand is that we are still in the very early stages of what this means. I have been speaking with very senior people, senior analysts, senior strategists, people in China who think carefully about these things, people in Russia who understand energy warfare better than almost anyone. And I want to tell you something that surprised even me. These are not people who are naturally sympathetic to Iran. These are people who think in cold strategic terms. And all of them, without exception, have told me that their assessment of Iran, their assessment of Hezbollah, their assessment of the entire axis of resistance has shifted dramatically because of this war. They did not expect this. They had been listening to Western analysts. They had been reading the same think tanks and the same intelligence reports that Washington was reading. And those reports told them that Hezbollah was severely weakened, that Iran was isolated, that the Islamic Republic was fragile. And then the war happened, and all of those assessments collapsed, because what we saw was something that the Western analytical framework simply could not predict. We saw a resistance that was not only intact, but that was capable of strategic depth that stunned even its closest allies. Now I want to talk about Trump, because Trump is at the center of this. And I want to be very precise about something. Trump came into this situation believing that maximum pressure would work. He believed that economic strangulation, military threat, and political isolation would force Iran to capitulate. He believed the same playbook that had failed repeatedly would somehow work this time. And what has happened is the opposite of what he intended. Every day that this siege continues, every day that Iran maintains its position in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States economy takes another hit. And it is not just the United States, it is the entire global economy. And as the global economy suffers, the countries of the world are looking for who is responsible. And they are arriving at an answer that is very bad for Washington and very bad for Tel Aviv. Let me be specific about the economic dimension because I think people underestimate how serious this is. We are already seeing the beginning of oil shortages in specific markets. We are already seeing LNG prices spiking in ways that are hitting European households extremely hard. We are seeing fertilizer prices rising in ways that are going to affect food production across the developing world. Countries like India, which import enormous quantities of oil from the Gulf, are in a very vulnerable position right now. Countries in Africa and Southeast Asia that depend on food imports are going to face price spikes that will create genuine social instability. And this is not a future scenario. This is beginning to happen right now. The factories that have not yet shut down are calculating how long they can continue. The supply chains that are still functioning are operating on reduced margins and reduced confidence. And when factories begin to shut down in earnest, when unemployment rises, when food prices hit ordinary people in their kitchens and their grocery stores, the political consequences will be enormous. And Trump owns all of this. He created this situation. He chose this path, and now he is stuck. Think about what stuck means for Trump specifically. He is a person who defines himself by winning, by deal-making, by strength. And right now he is in a position where he cannot win militarily against Iran without catastrophic consequences for the entire region and for global energy markets. He cannot win economically because his own pressure is now being turned back against his own economy and against the economies of his allies. He cannot win diplomatically because the world is watching what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in this war, and the majority of the world's population has formed a very clear view of who is the aggressor and who is the victim. Time is not on Trump's side. Every single day that passes, the pressure on him grows. Every single day that passes, more countries quietly begin to shift their economic relationships away from dollar dependency, away from US financial infrastructure, away from the kind of vulnerability that this situation has exposed. The world is learning a lesson in real time. And the lesson is that dependency on the United States carries enormous risk. Now, I want to talk about the Israeli regime, because the Israeli regime situation is, if anything, more precarious than that of the United States. And I say this based not on ideology but on strategic reality. The Israeli regime's entire existence, its entire security framework, its entire economic viability is built on one foundation. That foundation is unconditional Western support, primarily American support, military support, economic support, diplomatic cover in international institutions, political protection from accountability. Without that support, the Israeli regime is a small state surrounded by hundreds of millions of people who have legitimate grievances about what has been done to them and to their land. And that support is now under unprecedented pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The first direction is the genocide in Gaza. I am not going to use softer language. What has happened in Gaza is a genocide. International courts have said so. International legal scholars have said so. The evidence is undeniable, and it is documented, and it is on the screens of every person in the world who has internet access. And because of this genocide, public opinion in the United States, in Europe, in countries that were previously very sympathetic to Israel, has shifted dramatically. Young people in America do not see Israel the way their parents did. Young people in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Australia are looking at the images coming out of Gaza and they are making moral judgments. And those moral judgments are turning into political pressure. Politicians who were previously safe in their unconditional support for Israel are now calculating the cost of that support in electoral terms. The second direction is this war. This war has exposed something that the Israeli regime and its supporters desperately wanted to keep hidden. It has exposed that the Israeli regime, despite its enormous military spending, despite American weapons and American intelligence and American political support, cannot defeat the resistance, cannot neutralize Hezbollah, cannot bring Iran to its knees, cannot achieve the security outcomes that it has promised its own population for decades. And the Israeli population is watching this. The Israeli public is not stupid. They understand that the security situation they were promised does not exist. They understand that the military superiority they were told about is not as absolute as they were led to believe. And that is a profound crisis of legitimacy for any state. The third direction is economic. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz situation becomes directly relevant to the Israeli regime's long-term position. As the global economy suffers because of this conflict, as ordinary people in the United States and Europe see their energy bills rise and their food prices rise and their economic security erode, they are asking why. And the answer they are arriving at, not because of propaganda, but because of the actual sequence of events, is that the Israeli regime's actions and the political power of the Zionist lobby in Washington are major contributing factors to their economic pain. This is an extraordinary development. For decades, critics of Israel in the West were marginalized. They were accused of anti-Semitism. They were removed from positions. They were silenced. But you cannot silence an entire population that is feeling economic pain. You cannot call everyone who is struggling to pay their bills an anti-Semite. And so for the first time in many decades, there is genuine mainstream public discourse in Western countries about the cost of this relationship, about what unconditional support for the Israeli regime is actually costing ordinary Western citizens. And this discourse is growing, and it will continue to grow as the economic pressure intensifies. I want to go back to the axis of resistance for a moment because I think it is important to understand what has changed strategically. Before this war, the dominant narrative in Western analytical circles was one of a weakened and declining resistance. Hezbollah had lost fighters in Syria. Hamas had been under siege for years in Gaza. Iran was under maximum economic pressure. The narrative was one of inevitable decline, and this narrative was not just a media talking point. It influenced real strategic decisions. It influenced American military planning. It influenced Israeli military planning. It made decision makers in Washington and Tel Aviv confident that they could escalate without facing serious consequences. That confidence has now been shattered. And the shattering of that confidence has strategic implications that will last for decades. What the resistance has demonstrated is not just military capability. What it has demonstrated is strategic coherence, the ability to coordinate across different fronts, different actors, different geographies in ways that created genuine strategic pressure on a much more powerful adversary. The ability to absorb enormous damage and continue functioning. The ability to identify and exploit the vulnerabilities of an opponent who appears stronger on paper. And crucially, the ability to use the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic lever in ways that create global economic consequences. This is not the behavior of a weakened and declining movement. This is the behavior of a movement that has learned, adapted, and developed genuine strategic sophistication. And the senior people I have spoken to in Russia and China who are honest about this recognize it. They are recalibrating their assessments. They are recalibrating their relationships. And that recalibration has long-term consequences for the regional and global balance of power. Let me talk about something that people in the West do not discuss enough, the moral dimension. Not because I want to be preachy, but because the moral dimension has strategic consequences. The Islamic Republic of Iran made certain commitments to the Palestinian people. It made those commitments publicly and repeatedly, and it has honored those commitments under enormous pressure. It has paid an enormous economic and political cost for those commitments. And in doing so, it has earned something that cannot be bought and cannot be manufactured by public relations campaigns. It has earned genuine credibility in the eyes of hundreds of millions of Muslims and billions of people across the global South who understand what it means to resist. Contrast this with the Arab governments that normalized relations with Israel, that accepted American money and American weapons and American political cover in exchange for abandoning the Palestinian cause. Where is their credibility today? Where is their moral authority? Where is their standing in the eyes of their own populations? The contrast could not be more stark. And strategic power in the modern world is not just about missiles and economic leverage. It is about the ability to mobilize moral support, to build genuine alliances based on shared principles, to inspire people who are not paid to support you. And on that dimension, the balance has shifted dramatically. Now, I want to address something directly. Some people watching this will say, but Professor Marandi, what about the suffering? What about the Iranian people who have suffered under sanctions? What about the ordinary people in the region who have suffered because of this conflict? And I want to say clearly that the suffering is real. The economic pain that ordinary Iranians have experienced because of American sanctions is real, and it is unjust. The suffering of people across the region who have been caught in conflicts that they did not start is real, and it matters. But I want to ask you a question in return. What was the alternative? The alternative was to capitulate. The alternative was to accept whatever terms Washington and Tel Aviv decided to impose. The alternative was to abandon the Palestinian people to their fate. The alternative was to accept a regional order in which American military power and Israeli military power could operate without any deterrence, without any resistance, without any accountability. And that alternative would have produced far more suffering, not just for Iranians, for everyone in the region, for Palestinians above all. Resistance has a cost, but surrender has a greater cost. And the people of this region understand that. Even those who have suffered economically understand that. Let me turn to what happens next, because this is the most important question. The ceasefire, if it holds, does not change the underlying strategic reality. The Strait of Hormuz remains what it is. The axis of resistance remains what it has demonstrated itself to be. The economic pressures that this conflict has unleashed on the global economy do not disappear with a ceasefire. The shift in global public opinion does not reverse with a ceasefire. The recalibration that is happening in Moscow and Beijing and in capitals across the global south does not stop with a ceasefire. What has happened cannot be unhappened. The balance of power has shifted. And the question is whether the United States and the Israeli regime are capable of recognizing this shift and adjusting their behavior accordingly. Based on what I have observed over many years, I am not optimistic that they will make that adjustment quickly. The arrogance is deep. The ideological commitment to a certain view of American power and Israeli exceptionalism is deep. And that means the pressure will continue. The economic pain will continue. The strategic erosion will continue until the reality becomes impossible to deny even in Washington. I want to end with something personal. I have been analyzing this region for a very long time. I have seen many moments where people on all sides were absolutely certain of outcomes that did not materialize. I have seen confident American predictions fail. I have seen confident Israeli predictions fail. I have also seen moments of genuine despair in the resistance that gave way to unexpected resilience. And what this period has confirmed for me is something I have believed for a long time, but that this war has proven with a clarity that I did not expect so soon. The world is changing. The era of unipolar American dominance is ending, not because America has suddenly become weak. America remains enormously powerful, but because the rest of the world is increasingly unwilling to simply accept American dictates as the natural order of things, because the tools of resistance have become more sophisticated, because the economic relationships that once made American pressure irresistible are diversifying, because the moral authority that America once claimed has been shredded by its complicity in what has happened in Gaza. This is the world we are living in. And in this world, the warning that I am delivering is not a boast. It is a simple statement of strategic reality. They tried. They lost. And if they try again, they will lose again. Not because of hope. Not because of wishful thinking. But because the balance of power, the strategic realities, the economic consequences, and the moral judgment of the world have all shifted in a direction that makes another American or Israeli military adventure in this region an even more catastrophic proposition than the last one. The question is whether those in power in Washington and Tel Aviv are wise enough to understand this before they cause even more devastation to themselves and to the world. History suggests we should not hold our breath, but the world is watching, and the world is learning, and that ultimately is what matters most.